from the dim-lit conference room in the mid-1990s, where the air still carried the metallic scent of war and the faint echo of children's cries from distant battlefields. Two survivors found themselves seated across a scarred wooden table. No cameras, no speeches, just a low hum of fluorescent lights and the weight of unspoken grief pressing down like a storm about to break. Nelson Mandela, the man who had emerged from 27 years of stone-cold isolation with a smile that could forgive the unforgivable, leaned forward slightly, his eyes, those eyes that had stared down apartheid's brutality, softening for the first time in decades. Opposite him sat Graca Machel, her presence a quiet thunder, the widow of Mozambique's revolutionary President Samora, whose plane had plummeted from the sky in a mystery that still bled. She was no stranger to loss. She had buried a husband, a nation's dreams, and pieces of her own soul in the fight for freedom. They spoke of policy at first. Children's rights, regional healing, education as a weapon against ignorance. But words soon gave way to something deeper, a recognition that rippled through the room like a tremor. Both had been orphaned young. Both had sacrificed family for the cause. Both knew the hollow ache of burying comrades under cover of night. In that moment, amid the dry rustle of papers, a spark ignited. Not the dramatic flare of youth, but the steady glow of two souls who had walked through fire and emerged, scarred but unbroken, to find a mirror in the other's gaze. The connection grew in the shadows, away from the world's hungry eyes. Handwritten letters began to travel like secret dispatches between Maputo and Johannesburg. Mandela's elegant cursive flowing across the page, words of admiration that carried the weight of a man who had rarely allowed himself vulnerability. "You understand the silence after the guns stop," he wrote once, and Graca, reading by candlelight, felt her heart crack open just a fraction wider. They met for quiet dinners in safe houses, the kind of places where revolutionaries once planned uprisings, now transformed into sanctuaries of stolen laughter and shared wine. Admiration deepened into affection, and affection, against all odds in the autumn of their lives, blossomed into a love neither had dared to imagine. When the world finally learned, it erupted in disbelief. Mandela was nearly 80, Graca 53, a 27-year chasm that invited scorn and speculation. Tabloids screamed of scandal, of a gold digger chasing legacy, of a union too soon after his painful separation from Winnie. Critics whispered in corners, questioning motives, predicting collapse. But on July 18, 1998, his 80th birthday, Mandela proposed. Not on a public stage, not for applause, but in a small room filled only with family and the closest of confidants. His voice steady despite the tremble in his hands. The wedding that followed was intimate, sacred, a defiant whisper against the roar of judgment. Graca later recalled, her voice soft but unyielding, how they had met when both were settled in their pain, how they accepted each other, flaws, silences, and all, and how every day thereafter felt like a miracle granted by grace itself. At home, the myth dissolved like mist under morning sun. The man who had invited his jailers to dinner, who had walked free from Victor Verster with a smile that stitched the nation back together, left his socks strewn across the bedroom floor like a mischievous boy. He teased Graca's cooking with a twinkle in his eye, insisting even the prisoners on Robben Island had fared better, his laughter bubbling up in that private, silly way the cameras never captured. He wrote her love letters in perfect cursive, words so tender they could melt the hardest heart, promises of warmth after years of cold isolation, confessions of joy in her presence. He insisted on walking without a cane even as his legs betrayed him, waving off help with a stubborn grin that declared he had defied empires and would defy age itself. Graca saw it all, the boyish mischief, the unguarded giggles over nothing, the fragile moments when the weight of the world crept back in. She witnessed the sleepless nights when he stared at the ceiling, haunted by the ghosts of comrades who never came home, his voice breaking as he whispered doubts. Asterisk, had he abandoned his children for the cause? Should he have clung to the presidency longer? Had he failed them all? Asterisk, the world praised his forgiveness as grace. But Graca knew its true cost. Nightmares that clawed at his sleep, the emotional chasm between him and his family, the crushing burden of being perfect when all he craved was to be human. And there was a stubborn old man, impatient with fussing aides, clinging to routine like a lifeline, forget his hearing aids and pretending he was fine. Graca would simply smile, placed a device in his palm, and wait, no lectures, just a love that was fierce, patient, and unbreakable. Yet Graca was no mere shadow in his light. Born in 1945 in rural Mozambique, orphaned young, and raised in a Catholic mission, she had clawed her way to a scholarship in Lisbon, a black girl from the colonies plotting revolution in Europe's heart. She joined Frelimo, rose to become Minister of Education at 30, the first woman in independent Africa to wield such power, launching literacy campaigns, and building schools for girls that reshaped a nation. When Samora died in that mysterious crash of 1986, she refused to shatter, channeling grief into global advocacy, authoring the 1996 UN report on children in armed conflict that forced the world to see the innocent as more than statistics. By the time she married Mandela, she was already a titan, chancellor of the University of Cape Town, co-founder of the Elders, knighted by the Queen, not as anyone's wife, but as Graca Machel. She kept her name, her work, her fire, insisting she had been herself before him, and remained so with him, never pausing her own war for his. The final years unfolded like a slow, cruel elegy. At the 2010 World Cup closing ceremony, Mandela, frail, trembling, leaned heavily on Graca's arm as the stadium roared. She held him up, whispering strength into his ear, her heart splintering as she later confessed the sparkle was fading, that watching a giant age toward the soul. On December 5th, 2013, he slipped away at home, surrounded by love. The world mourned in a frenzy. Presidents descending, security choking the streets. The funeral devolving into political theater with speeches and tears from strangers who claimed to know him but had never shared a meal or heard him hum jazz at midnight. Graca stood beside the casket, dignified yet shattered, listening to the hollow echoes. She withdrew then, grieving in the dark, before rising to speak. Not to destroy the legend, but to liberate it. Nelson wasn't perfect, she said, her voice a quiet blade. Asterisk, he was good, achingly good, but he had rage, guilt, doubts. He changed his mind. He grew. That's what made him great. Not being born a saint, but fighting to become one every damn day. Asterisk in humanizing him. She stole no hope. She gave it back, insisting that if leaders must be flawless, ordinary people lose the belief they too can change the world. Greatness, she urged, is persistence through the mess. Today, at 79, Graca lives on a fierceness that defies time. Tending gardens, penning poetry, mentoring young African women who will burn down injustices and rebuild stronger. Through the Graca Machel Trust, she battles child marriage, funds female empires, weaves networks of power across a rising continent. When asked if the world still sees her only as Mandela's widow, she smiles, lethal, luminous, and replies, asterisk, let them. I know who I am. Asterisk, she refuses erasure, declaring women are not vessels for greatness but the forge itself. Nelson Mandela gave the world forgiveness. Graca Machel gives it truth. He taught that education is the most powerful weapon. She roars that so is love, raw, stubborn, human love that dares to cradle a falling giant. He once wrote that he was blooming like a flower because of her. She whispers now that he was a great husband, and loving him taught her that even legends bleed, even titans need arms to fall into. This is no ending. It is the dawn of a truer legend, one where the saint falls, the husband rises, and the world learns that behind every myth beats a heart worth knowing in all its raw, beautiful, imperfect glory. Like if Mandela's flaws make his greatness burn brighter. Share with the quiet warrior in your life. Subscribe plus bell for more tales where icons breathe, bleed, and love. Next week, the star who sold their soul to Hollywood and screamed regret until their final breath. This is Tales of the Famous. Myths crumble. Truth reigns eternal.